This Wednesday's weekly question comes from Reddit user Major101, who asked about forgiveness, masturbation, and even some biblical heresy. Welcome to The Current Christian, where we give disciples the tools and tips they need to grow in their ministry. Every Wednesday, we release a video where we explore questions that you ask on the internet. You won't want to miss our next video, so be sure to hit that subscribe button. And if you're interested in sending us your own question, you can do so by tweeting us at The Current Christ. I've got it spelled out there, and putting hashtag WWQ. This week we have a very good question from Real Major 101. Hello, Real Major 101. All right, what they ask is, I've been quoting this verse, Matthew 5:28, and I've been struggling with quitting masturbation, and when people told me it was not a sin, I would show them that verse and show how that it was talking about not masturbating. I found Deuteronomy 4:2 as well. My dad tells me that masturbation is not a sin, but I did not believe him. I thought that it was what Matthew 5:28 was talking about, not just looking at women with lust, but also talking about masturbation. I also saw Revelation 22:18-19. I was never trying to change the word or deceive anyone. I just thought that it's what the verse meant. Is that what I did? Well, God forgive me. All right, so from what I understand, you have been struggling to quit masturbating and feel that you need to stop. But you are also conflicted because others are telling you that masturbation is not a sin. So now you are concerned that you have either added or subtracted from the Bible, which is why you mentioned the verses from Deuteronomy and Revelation. Well, first, I would like to address the Deuteronomy and Revelation verses. It's very easy to read these and assume that the author is talking about adding or subtracting from the Bible, but in context of the writing, it's safe to assume that the writers were not referring to the Bible we read today. When Deuteronomy was written, there was no Bible in existence, therefore the verse is likely referring to the commandments that God gave the Israelites. And the same can be said with the book of Revelation. When John wrote verses 18-19, the Bible still did not exist. So when John wrote Revelation, we can assume he was referring specifically to the book of Revelation. But should we add or subtract from the Bible? I don't think we should. The books that comprise the Bible were put there very meticulously and intentionally. If you want, I can devote a whole episode explaining why certain books are included while others are left out. But now let's talk about if you committed biblical heresy. By the way, for those who don't know, biblical heresy is taking something from the Bible and teaching a message that contradicts the message. So, did you partake in biblical heresy? Honestly, I don't think so. From what it sounds like, all you did was talk about the convictions you had while reading the Bible. You weren't imposing your opinions onto others, and you weren't teaching others what you have interpreted. Also, the conclusion you came to while reading Matthew 5:28 isn't a complete contradiction from what Jesus was teaching. Therefore, it does not meet the criteria of biblical heresy. However, I don't believe that Matthew 5:28 is specifically talking about masturbation. But in order to best explain the message Jesus was communicating, I want to look at the big picture of what happens in Matthew chapter 5. So at this point in Matthew, it's still very early on in Jesus' ministry. In the previous chapter, Jesus got done spending 40 days being tempted in the desert. He then began inviting his group of disciples to follow him, and by the end of chapter 4, he starts to gain a lot of popularity after healing like a lot of people. So chapter 5 starts off with Jesus seeing a crowd of people gathering, so Jesus started to teach his disciples on the side of a mountain. And you might recognize this as the very famous Sermon on the Mount scene, which is way more than just a bunch of lessons that Jesus was teaching. The Sermon on the Mount is basically a recreation of God giving Moses the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai. The laws that God gave Moses helped to set the Israelites apart from other nations, and its purpose was to show the people what to do so they could be in God's presence. And Jesus' sermon not only helped set apart Jesus' ministry and his students from the ministry of the Pharisees and teachers of the law, but the sermon also defines Jesus' purpose, which is to fulfill the law. So right off the bat, Jesus starts the sermon by identifying the type of people who God blesses, and then identifies the type of people who follow Jesus. From there, Jesus says he is here not to remove the law, but to accomplish the law's purpose, which is to wipe clean the sins of humanity in order to create a loving and harmonious relationship between God and people. Ironically, Jesus then starts raising the standards of the law, making it even harder to follow. He does this where he says a thing where he's like, you have heard the law says X, but I say X and Y and Z. He sounds like that for some reason. Jesus basically takes every major law that people thought they may never break and raises the standards so much that it's practically impossible for anyone to not break them. So why would Jesus do this? Well, not only is it to show that we are held to a higher standard, but it is also to show that no one can fully obey the law because we are all flawed. Therefore, we receive God's promise of freedom only by believing in Jesus Christ. And this is found in Galatians chapter 3, verse 22. So what message is Jesus trying to convey? That we can't fully obey the law, yet we are still held to a higher standard because we are set apart. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 28, is that specifically referring to masturbation? No, not specifically, yet you can very easily argue that the act of masturbation is lustful. Is it a sin? Not explicitly, but if you feel really convicted that you shouldn't masturbate, then you should avoid masturbating. Romans chapter 14, verse 23 says that if you do anything you believe is not right, you are sinning. One thing that helps me is to not look at anything that can feed sexual desires. I find that when I let my eyes wander while looking at women online or in society, then I am more prone to having strong urges to masturbate. Jesus says our eyes is like a lamp that provides light to your body. So when your eyes are healthy, your whole body is filled with light, and that's in Matthew chapter 6, verse 22. So is God going to forgive you? Well, let me put it this way. God so desperately wants to be involved in your life that he's willing to die for you if that's what it takes. Thank you for watching. I'd also like to thank our community of supporters over on Patreon. This video wouldn't be made possible without you, and if you really like this video, you too can join our crew of Patreon supporters by donating a few dollars a month to the Current Christian channel. Remember to hit that subscribe button and the little bell icon if you haven't done so already. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in our next video.